Very long lessons. I haven't seen anybody going to sleep yet, so I applaud you for that. We're going to talk now about what is one of the most requested lessons from me anywhere I go, and that is something that is epidemic amongst us. And that is the problems of pornography and internet addictions to pornography and to the chat rooms and other media whereby sexual conduct takes place technologically. And what has been my experience, and this one is alarming, is that we have an epidemic amongst us and we have not even necessarily identified it. From my experience and the multiple emails I get from brethren across the country, and from comparison with other religious groups, about 1 in 4 men amongst us has a problem with internet pornography. And with women, women amongst us tend to have more problems with the chat rooms, although many of them are caught up in the actual picture stuff also. What I really believe we have is an epidemic that's going on amongst us in secrecy, supposedly. But there's a God above who sees us when we're sitting at our computers. And I want to say in the very beginning that you can go to heaven without a computer. You can go to heaven without a television. You can go to heaven without the media. You can go to heaven without a cell phone. But you can't go to heaven if you abuse those in sexual conduct, misconduct. When Jesus talked about that it would be better to pluck our eye out or to cut our hand off if it offends us, then we may well learn the lesson that if we have electronic devices that are offenses to us, if we can't control them, then we need to get rid of it. And I realize that that's quite a harsh statement in our culture because that would distance us from some others in the technological world. But I tell you, it would be a lot better going to heaven without those than we'd be going to hell with them. In a survey taken of persons with extramarital affairs, 20 to 25% of all Americans will have sexual contact or sexual misconduct with someone other than their spouse while they're married. The pornography world grosses over $17 billion in the U.S. alone. The amount is large. It's larger, totally larger, than all the box offices, receipts, and revenues generated by rock and country music recordings, theaters, opera, and concerts combined. We live in a sex-saturated technological culture. Out on the internet, we have such things as ways to do good business, and there is a positive side and a strength to the internets. But unfortunately, most of the times, over half the time that people use the internet, actually 60% of the time they use the internet, it is for a sexually explicit purpose. And so we have machines in our homes that often are subject to abuse and to bring in the kinds of things that God has forbidden. There was a gentleman that I heard out of Washington, D.C., and he is a man who actually trains our troops, trains our snipers to go in and assassinate people. And what he said in this particular presentation is that in order for him to teach people to do that, the first thing he has to do is to numb their conscience to where it doesn't bother them, where they can go in, take care of the task, don't mean nothing, get out. And what he said is that the same techniques that he is using with our military and training snipers are the very same techniques that are being used in video games, you know, the little kind you sit in front of TV, and in our internets, and basically in the pornography that is rampant in our culture. He wrote a book teaching our kids to kill. And what he said is that we're training a generation that ultimately what we're training them to do will come off the screen and come into real life in a time in your lifetime. And here's what he was really talking about in that, is that what goes in through the ears, we filter through our value system. What comes in through the eyes comes in suddenly, and it's imprinted like a flash bulb, just like that on our brain. And what he was saying in this is that the things that we see have more impact on our brain than the things we hear. I could illustrate that, but our time, I'll try to stay on task with this. But what he was trying to point out here is that that those things that are happening on our video games and on our internet, that these things are impacting the minds and imprinting on the minds. Remember that amygdala I talked about? And they're imprinting on our minds in such a way, on the minds of our children in such a way, that they'll be acted out in many of their adult lives. I have sat and counseled with families with young children, and I asked them, what are they watching? And I've actually asked them to bring in some of their games and all, and I can't believe some of the things some of the young people are playing. They're out here doing this thing, racing a car down the street, and next thing you know, somebody's shooting a cop or running them off in a pole, and then here's a prostitute on the street, you shoot her, her head flies off, and her blood gushes out, and you got all kinds of gory stuff out there, and different levels on that. So now you beat that game, now you go to the next one. And these kids will sit in front of that doing this and not paying attention to what's in the room, and they play these games, and guess what? At some point in time, as I want to demonstrate tonight, at some point in time, what is seen on the screen leaves the screen and comes into reality. We're going to talk about that in this lesson this evening. What we are really doing is building on this particular lesson that we just had on the problems of sexual abuse and what the Bible very clearly says. Passage in the book of Job that we didn't use last hour is Job 31 and verse 1. And this is what everybody needs to do. I have made a covenant with mine eyes. Why then should I think upon a maid? What he said is, I made a deal with myself that I'm not going to be out here checking out the women. Now I think that while Job didn't have a computer, I think that's a good thing to put on your computer. I made a covenant with my eyes that I would not think upon a maid. In Genesis 1 and verse 27, what we see is that God made man and woman, and that he expects us to treat each other with dignity and respect. In our sex-saturated culture, 1 in 3 girls will be sexually molested by the time they're 18 years old. And 1 in 7 boys will be sexually molested before they're 18 years old. What we have is a sex-saturated, perverted society. And we've got to watch our families. A word to the wise is sufficient. Pornography is an enemy. It is an enemy that destroys the innocence of children. It is that which UNICEF reports that 1 million children each year are forced into prostitution and used to make pornography. In Mark the 9th chapter, verse 42, God says that one who would cause a little child to stumble, it'd be better for them to have a millstone hanging around their neck and be drowned in the depths of the sea rather than cause one of these little ones to stumble. We live in an age and a time when innocence is lost very quickly. And it's lost partly because we bring it into our own homes. Many of us who would not dare take our kids into a bar or a strip joint or some seedy part of town will turn our TVs on or our various electronic equipment and bring it right in the living room and sit there and call it entertainment. What the mind feeds on, the body will ultimately act on. When we pour it to our head, out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaks, and also out of the abundance of the heart, what's in our head, our actions will become. We act on what we see. That's how we behave as human beings. There are several levels of persons who who abuse the internet. I'll come back to this other one in just a moment. But there are several levels of people that abuse the internet. Some are just at-risk users. They're out there kind of just looking at stuff and don't necessarily spend a lot of time on internet stuff. But I'll tell you what, that if we develop that curiosity, just like that first high that we looked at last night, when we come back to it, we'll begin trying to experience that first euphoria in this thing. In Matthew, the 5th chapter, verse 27 through 30, there Jesus talks about looking to lust. And Romans chapter 1, verse 21 through 32, talk about that as well. And then 1 Corinthians 6 and 12, we've already cited these several times, tells us that we should, Paul says he would not be brought under the power of any. The at-risk user is the person who's the curiosity seeker. And this is the person who goes out there, sometimes just out of boredom, because they want to see what's out there. And so they begin doing the surfing with the mouse. Usually they don't buy into the different things, but they do little trailers and clips that are out there and kind of check out different deviant sexual behavior. There's a lot of little free stuff out there that people get enticed by, and that's why it's there. And many times people will say that in their favorites on their computer, and they'll go out here and get their excitement from looking at things out there at nudity on the internet. Sometimes what we find with the at-risk user is these are persons who may have a stressful time at work, and just like any of the other addictions, what the person is seeking is an escape from their reality world. And so what happens often is they get caught up in the fantasy world of the internet. And actually people say as they get involved in this that there's a relief in that. Sometimes people will get all anxious or frustrated or bored about things, and they'll go out there and click on the internet, click on the pornography, and ultimately gives them this escape from the reality that they may be experiencing in life otherwise. We use some very plain terms tonight, and hopefully not offensive to anyone, but I need to speak so you understand me. The sexuality that is expressed on the internet is not just looking at the images, but is also playing with yourself sexually while this is going on. Now, let me say this, that the main object most people have when they're looking at the pornography on the internet, as they begin to masturbate or to play with themselves, that the main object is not orgasm, but the main object is to maintain that sexual stimulation, because when the orgasm happens, the excitement's over. And so it's again just like a drug of addiction, that this time we're following our own sexual excitement and we're kind of trying to ride that out while we're out here checking out all kinds of different stuff. And here's what's happening in the meantime. Now, little do people realize that what they're doing is they're altering their sexual behaviors by delaying processes, by stepping up processes, by having to have multiple pictures or multiple visions in their mind before they can reach their sexual satisfaction. And what they're significantly doing is retraining their brain to have sexual activity. And what this means is this, that when we are with our wife for the real thing, or our partner for the real thing, then when we do that, then often we are not able any longer to be satisfied with the real thing. But we have imprinted on our minds images of other things. And they are going to call out to us for satisfaction. So in the first stage, what we have is at-risk users. What makes that so easy is that we have susceptibility. It's affordable. We can be done in secrecy, we think. And we're able to go out here and to experience this kind of stuff. And then what we have in the next phases is not just the experimental use, but now we begin, as the mind has fed on these visions, now we begin to get into the obsessive use of it. And what that means is we begin, just like the other addictions, we begin planning our day on how we can get alone and get to the internet. Some even download the pictures and they carry them with them in their wallets or on other places, and they run into the bathroom at work, or they'll shut their door at work. And by the way, most companies now have zero tolerance, and someone comes home with an unexplained firing from work, you might want to ask them what really went on, because there's a lot of folks getting fired for violating company policies on internet pornography. But what happens in this stage with the compulsive piece, that is planning your life and your day around it, then we also begin noticing withdrawal symptoms or building up to use symptoms. And those that have been in this, if you've been in that, you know. There's the sweaty palms. There's the excitement, the enticement of, I can't wait to get home, can't wait to check this out and that out. And also an irritation if anything blocks the person from that. And now what we're starting to see is some real classic signs of addiction. Because what they're addicted to is that sexual high that ends in the orgasm, not the orgasm itself. The fantasy. Now let me say this also. There is not a man or a woman alive that can compete with the fantasy. Because in fantasy land, that can be anybody, anything, doing anything or saying anything that the person wants to run through their mind. There's not another human alive that can compete with that. So basically what we do is we begin numbing ourselves sexually, as I said before, where we cannot be satisfied with the real thing. There are some characteristics of persons that get caught up in this, and that is that they lose the frequency of control. They participate in it compulsively. They may even sit up or sneak out of bed in the middle of the night and go and check this thing out. They find ways to try to cover it up, to hide it, in case somebody's going back checking out their history on their computer, or otherwise trying to see where have you been. You will notice as you come into a room, people quickly turning off either the screen or the computer to try to avoid the person walking in the room seeing what they've been looking at. The person may spend too much time also kind of preoccupied with that computer, and ultimately what goes downhill is the important things of life, and now life gets way out of balance. Now, while I've talked about pictures, I want to talk now and go into the other types here of these things. That with the picture, or with the chat rooms and even the Skyping and all that kind of stuff, with those things out there, we're finding many of the women that will go out there and they get involved in the chat rooms. Now here's why I say that generally speaking, the men go to the pictures and the women go to the chat rooms. Here's a general statement. Women tend to get lured in or caught in by relationship. That is, by the emotional need to be wanted or needed by someone else. Men tend to be caught up by the actual picture or by the suggestive stuff that is visual. That's generally true. But what I'm seeing, and we have sisters amongst us, some of which have been to see me, and I've been in contact with some of those, trying to help them. But we have sisters amongst us who are leaving their homes. They've been on the internet half the night, and they're making rendezvous times, telling their husbands that they're going to a conference somewhere, and they're not. They're going to meet their internet lover out in Texas, or out in Idaho, or out in Maine, or various other places around the world. This one woman had an awful lot of conferences all of a sudden. And her husband finally figured out what was going on when one of the boyfriends called back and was asking for her at home. You see what had happened with her is that she had moved past the stage of the obsession and the compulsion, and she'd moved into the real world. Because there comes a time in our life, in the life of those that are out here abusing this thing on the computer, to where the computer ceases to satisfy. Remember, evil men seducers wax worse and worse, that as your tolerance builds, now after a while you've seen just about everything there is to see out there. And now what you do is that ceases to satisfy. So what do when our tolerance begins to decline? We fail to get our satisfaction because our tolerance is built up. What we do is we either change the object, change what we're taking or what we're looking at. Now what that's going to do is take you into all kinds of kink and perversion. All the way from pony pornography. By the way, if you don't know what that is, don't even ask me. All the way from that who knows what. Bestiality, all kinds of things, the perversions, even the snuff videos are out there if you want to watch those. By snuff videos, someone's being strangled or choked, and sometimes being killed in order for someone else's sexual gratification. And guess what? When that leaves the screen, you have someone in a room near you that is dangerous to be with because they have left the screen and now they're going into reality. Now in reality, often people don't step immediately into acting out what they've seen on the screen. What they will do is they step first into voyeurism, that is, the peeping toms. They're out here checking people out. They may move into things like upskirting or various other kinds of sexual perversions. If you don't know what these are, God bless you. You don't need to know. But they'll move into stuff like that. They will get into forwarding. You know what forwarding is. And forwarding is, you ever been in a crowded elevator and something you got touched and you weren't too sure if it was an accident or on purpose? That's forwarding. Because most of the time that's not an accident. There are people that love to hang out in crowds to do that and to recall the images later. You can only imagine what you're doing. But that's when it steps out into real life. Then it gets into the strip clubs, the exotic dancers or whatever we want to call them. From there it gets into either adultery or into whoredom. And people begin getting into escort services and some of those other things you can find out there online. But what's happened is this has gone into real life. It's gone from the screen into real life because what we start out with on the screen, where you start, is not where you end up. There is no logical stopping place once we start feeding our mind on filth and create the appetite for the immorality. There is no natural stopping place. This is scary stuff. I don't know what you think, but it's scary stuff to me. And even scarier when folks sit and tell me about it. Believe it or not, I went to a Sex Addicts Anonymous meeting. And no, I'm not a sex addict. I went with a guy that was, and I wasn't too sure, or actually I sent him. And I wasn't too sure that he didn't just walk in the front door and was heading out the back door, so I went in to be with him, and I got trapped at the meeting because I didn't have a legitimate way to get out. So I sat down, and I told him I was just there to visit and see if that meeting was for me, and I concluded it wasn't. But I was there. And he was there too, and he needed it. But during that meeting, I heard some of the most horrendous things. It was a scary meeting. Folks came in, it was on a lunch hour, you can imagine there were people of all walks of life in there, not just the seedy people from that hang out in weird places, but some folks that looked much like you and me. And in that meeting, what I heard was all kinds of things about stuff going through their mind, about what today I was imagining this about this person and that person, or this child or that child, or saw this animal and I really had trouble, and I need to get the consensus of the group to help me through this. You think this doesn't happen? It happens. You just don't know about it. I want to tell you something. If you want to play with the devil, he'll take you for a ride. And he'll throw you out on the side of the road when it's over with, bruised and battered, and virtually unable to take care of yourself. Most folks don't realize once they start this journey on the internet where it will take them. It has no natural stopping place. I want to talk for a moment to you guys. Guys being men. And to you women too. Because you see, the stages of an affair that has to do with internet are just as psychologically and emotionally damaging as if the person had had actual contact. The piece I left out a moment ago is the cyber sexing now, where people take the mouse and act like you're doing a sex act with somebody else messing with the mouse on the other end while they both mess with themselves. And some of our brethren have raised the question, is that grounds for divorce? Because you've got the mental actions going on in the sexual stuff. And I'm going to tell you quite frankly, I don't believe that it is, but I'll tell you what, I have a hard time arguing with that. Now, here's a man and a woman, or women and women. And by the way, everybody's out there that tells you a man and a woman aren't. And everybody sends you a picture, shows how cute they aren't. The effect of infidelity over the internet on the other person's mate is actually seen in about 6 different stages. And the effects of this are just as devastating as if the person cheated on them. It does as much destruction to the marriage to find out that your mate is having sex with a machine as it does as if they were having sex with a real person. You can't compete with the fantasy. What it does basically when people begin to get out of here and have the internet affairs is it begins to create a climate where an affair can germinate. And now, rather than being in the real world, what's happening is we're creating a climate. We're already going through the mental processes of developing an affair online. And then there's the actual betrayal that takes place. Ultimately, then there's the revelation of the affair online. And then there's the crisis in the marriage. When your marriage partner finds out what's been going on out there, the first reaction usually is one of bewilderment. Because there was no plan on how to address this, it has caught us totally by surprise. It was not anticipated. Some families, oh well, that's just the way guys are. I'm going to tell you what, that's not the way guys are. Don't blame that on all guys. That's the way perverts are. There's the revelation of the affair, there's the bewilderment, and then what is destroyed as this is discovered, that your mate is out there online messing around. There's the safety, the security, and the survival of the marriage that immediately comes up as threatened. And they're all jeopardized by online affairs. Then there's the desperation that comes to the mate. I need information. What's going on? Am I not satisfying you? Is something wrong with me? Why do you need to look outside of our marriage? And there's insecurity now that takes place in the marriage as this stuff is discovered. Then there is confusion. I'm not sure what the rules are now. Because the rules are changing. Then there's questions that people begin to ask as they find their mate cheating out here in the affairs. Well, how did you meet? Is there still an emotional connection going on with you and the other person? This is where we get in the chat rooms and maybe even making live phone calls, follow-up to some of this stuff. How did you meet? Is there an emotional connection? Or is this just a sexual connection? In other words, are you all in love? You got the pitter-pats going on. And then if there's been dating or actual rendezvous where the people have met, then there's the question of how long has this been going on? Then there's the relationship with the in-laws, because ultimately somebody's beginning to talk. Usually the one that's hurt is beginning to talk and to raise questions, or else they're suffering in silence, and you begin to see something is really wrong because their countenance is falling. And then there's questions about, well, what did our wedding vows mean? Because the question comes up, have you kept yourself from me and from me alone until death separates us? And if so, what are you doing out there playing with yourself while you're looking and thinking about another woman or another man? And so there are all kinds of adjustments. And then sometimes what happens is there's anger that takes place, and the feeling, you know, if you're doing that with me, well, guess what? You can play this game. Now our marriage is really in trouble. And so we start playing the retaliation game. Just getting over the internet pornographic addiction, once it has been discovered, just getting over that where the marriage can go back to a satisfactory level takes 2 to 3 years on the average with pretty consistent counseling. That's how much the betrayal hurts. That's how much damage that it does. And then the families often lose that warm, fuzzy feeling for each other because there is damage that has been done to the marriage, and some may say that's it. I believe that pornography on the internet is wrong for several reasons. I believe that it is a perversion against everything God cherishes most. And that is that He made man and woman in His image after His likeness. And that being made in that way, that God designed man for woman and man and women to satisfy one another in the sexual relationship in marriage. And this flies right in the face of what God designed. It is a perversion at best. Pornography is an enemy that destroys the innocence of children we talked about. Children can go out here doing a homework assignment and find themselves right in the middle of a pornographic site if you don't have the protections on your computer. I had one kid that was doing a study on where the president lives and punched up whitehouse.com, and guess what he got? And guess what mom and dad got? They got to do some sexual education. Because whitehouse.gov is where the president lives. The kid didn't know it. It was an innocent thing. But all of a sudden we have innocence destroyed. Pornography also is a lie. What it says is the best sex is online or out there somewhere else. And many people buy that lie. But pornography promises what it cannot deliver. Because God says the best relationship is one that has been developed and that is a journey that takes place in marriage. Who are the victims? I want to suggest in the first place that I have some of those folks that are out there online in all their nudity. I have some of those folks in some of my groups. And while it may surprise you, they have their clothes on in those groups. And they sit and talk with me about the stuff that has taken place in their heads. And you know what? 93% of those that are out there online, who I've experienced in my groups, 93% of those have been sexually molested as children. And the larger part of those cannot even stand men. They're lesbian. They have been turned off by being abused by man after man after man after man. And ultimately what they decided to do is hate men. And if men are going to use me, I will use them. That's what you're looking at. That's the hard, cold truth of what's really out there. They don't have the hots for you. They can't even stand you. They're putting on a show. There are innocent victims out there. I have sat with those that have been sexually molested as children. And I've seen many of them in tears. One comes to mind especially, a young lady who began talking about her sexual abuse, and what she said is, Art, after someone takes it from you, it doesn't matter who's next. But I challenged her because it does. Because every time there's someone that exploits you to the next level, the next level, the next level, it drives the wounds even deeper and deeper and deeper. And as I challenged her with that, what she acknowledged is, I have become numb. I have become numb. Those who are addicted to pornography are often victims too. They are victims of the industry that chooses not only to exploit those who are on the screen, but to exploit those who are observing the screen. In Matthew 5, we've had clear passages on whoever looks after a woman to lust after her has committed adultery with her already in his heart. We have clear statements in the book of Romans that we are not to have eyes full of adultery, that we are to abstain from fornication. We have clear passages on all of that. So, I want to suggest to you that what we need to do in our day and time, because I need to find my next page, what we need to do in our day and time, I've got all this mixed up, so we're just going to wing it, folks. What we need to do is to realize also that not only are there victims out there, but realize that this has become Satan's tool to destroy and to exploit God's children. It is doing untold damages in our congregations. So the question becomes, how do we go about recovering from all of this? Because I would not want to leave you with thinking that, okay, this is something we don't need to do, because you already know you don't need to do it. But how do people get past this? And I want to suggest that there are some very clear ways to get past all of this. I want to suggest first that the trip back is as long or longer as the trip there. Because the damage that has been done needs to be undone. There are emotional consequences. And there is the feelings of having lived the double life. Lack of self-care often goes along in this. Family life may have suffered. The sexual decay and delay during intimacy may have been damaged. And by the way, not everything out there is legal to watch. And there's some sites, if you trip, that there's people like the FBI out there watching. And they may come to a door near you if you look at those. I hope you look good in orange if that's the case. Or is it maroon this year? There are also victims out there, and ultimately you become the victim of your own guilt. I want to say something else here while I'm talking about the internet. I am finding more and more Christians that are going online in dating services. And some of those sites, there's some Church of Christ sites out there, and I use that just kind of as the lead-in to the sites. Or if you are a lonely heart and you want to go out and find somebody, that there are some people out there that you can kind of chit-chat with. I'll tell you, some of those are legitimate, some aren't. But I have also counseled some of our brethren who found each other online and thought that this was the end of the greatest thing that ever happened. Because since we're apart from each other, we can find each other, we can chit-chat back and forth, and everything will be fine, right? Wrong. You ought to hear them sit and talk to me. Because what they say is, well, you know, when we were online, I could get a word in. But now that we're together, they want to talk all the time. Or, well, we didn't talk about in-laws. Or we didn't think about how our family would respond to the fact we never knew each other. And we didn't think that as well as we knew each other, when we finally fell into each other's arms, that we found ourselves in full fornication. And by the way, he's too close to his kids, and there's not enough room for me. Or he didn't like my son or daughter. And guess what? We fell passionately in love with one another, and we met each other two or three times, and then we got married. I met one Christian couple that decided to get married before they even met each other in person. Now that's scary. And then they're coming in, and now they're saying, well, you know, we know that we can't divorce. We know what the Bible teaches on that. And can you help us put this together? Anybody want to hang their sign out next to mine? What on earth would you tell people like that? Just as opposites as they can be, some of them. And now glued together for life. I tell you what, if there's ever a time that women need to be taught to love their husband, I need some older women that will step up, because it's a job. Be careful what you get into out there online. Lonely hearts sometimes get a little crazy. By the way, while I'm on that, let me say this, that you need to be very careful what kind of information you put out there online. There are a lot of predators out there. And when I say a lot, I say a lot underlined. And some of the information you put out there, do you know that you can find out what your house looks like just by knowing a little bit about you? Do you know there's satellites that take pictures of your houses? They can go out here and find out about your birthday. If you put too much information out there, they'll find out all kinds of likes and dislikes about you. And some of them may stalk you. And what's even scarier is when our kids get out there and start telling people about themselves on MySpace or Facebook or some of the other familiar sites, and they're putting out all this stuff innocently. And now here's some pervert out here that's got your kids' information and can communicate with them as if they know them, and you don't know who that kid's communicating with. Remember what I said? What starts online moves into reality. That's the third stage. We have to be careful. I also want to tell you something, is that God speaks out on this kind of thing. He tells us in a passage we read in our last hour that we are to possess our vessels in honor. God doesn't intend for us to sit up all night playing with ourselves. We need to possess our vessels in honor. That our husband or our wife are the ones who are intended to satisfy. And what I want to tell you also is that God speaks out on this. If this is what we're using to relieve our boredom and our anxiety, then may God help us all. Because we are told in nothing to be anxious, but in everything with prayer and supplication, let your request be made known to God. This is just as far from that as anything I can think of. We're to abstain from fleshly lust, and we're to glorify God in our body. 1 Peter 2, verse 11 and 12. And then we're admonished, 1 Timothy 5:22, to keep ourselves pure. I don't know of anything else that's going to get us any further away from this than this. I'm going to show you in our final here, and I'm going to do this very quickly. You've got another sheet there that has this on it. I'm going to go through this very quickly. But here's what happens with addictions. Flip off. Here's what happens with addictions. Is addictions slowly rob us of everything that is important in life. They rob us of our moral values. And in place of those, we see subtly creeping in. Am I on? I think so. What we see subtly creeping on or into our lives is character defects. And here's what they look like. That's what they look like. Here's what they look like. Get your sheet out. Oh, wait a minute. I'm doing it wrong. Optimize. Okay. I'm hitting it off button. All right. Fear. Now look at this in the light of the internet, but also in the light of all the addictions we've talked about so far. Because what we see is fear coming into the person's life. I'm afraid I'll get caught. I'm afraid somebody's going to see me. We're looking back over our shoulder. We're double checking ourselves. Fear comes in as a character defect. What happens when we have fear in our life? Our stress level goes up. Our anxiety level goes up. What happens when that goes up? Then we try to find our subject of addiction to take care of that. And so we feed into a vicious cycle. Fear then is one of those, but another thing that happens in our life is we begin to hate things and we begin to hate people that are around us. People that remind us of what we should be. Sometimes that can be taken out of the church. That we kind of hate the church. We hate to see certain brethren coming because we know they're going to talk to us about what's not right in our lives. Then what we also see is egotism that goes on in the person's life. This character effect comes in, and I see this especially with drug addicts because they're very grandiose and a lot of egotism. It's all about me. Now when it comes to the sexual addictions that we talked about tonight, It's all about them. It's all about them being satisfied, them being happy, their needs being met. When it's the chemical addictions, it's all about them. I don't need God. I don't need anybody around me. I just want to go out and get high. Loneliness also comes in. Because as we are trying to keep our secrets, now what we end up doing is we isolate ourselves and we begin to use or to do things in secret. And thus loneliness comes in and takes over in our lives. With that also comes the anxiety and the worries. And guess what? That feeds the addiction again. We've got to chase the high, chase that chemical that's going to take us where we want to go. Complacency, meaning I don't care about anybody or anything. This is all about me, as we said just a moment ago. And complacency basically is the things that used to matter in my life now no longer matter. Church doesn't matter. God doesn't matter. Relationship with brethren doesn't matter. Relationship with family doesn't matter. Relationship with money doesn't matter. Relationship with job doesn't matter. Nothing matters. What matters is that I get satisfied, my addiction gets satisfied. See how this overwhelms a person? See how it overcomes a person? See why that it crowds out everything that has any meaning in your life? And then we have the denial. Well, I'm not so bad. Well, you know, all guys look at the internet. All guys check this out. Well, it's just a guy thing. And you get all this stuff out here that someone's supposed to really believe. And the person saying it sometimes doesn't even believe it, or they look at you funny like they're trying to get you to believe it. Denial's out there. We get this in substance addiction. The person's telling us, well, you know what? I really don't have that bad of a problem because I still have a job. I still bring home a paycheck. The bills still get paid, so I really don't have a problem. And what happens is in any of these addictions that we talked about this weekend, in any of those, what happens is that the person can always find someone worse than themselves in order to use as the excuse that I really don't have a problem. You know, one of our biggest ones, I'm just human. Well, so am I. So am I. But that doesn't excuse me doing this. I'll tell you what, anybody who's using that for an excuse needs to look at whose image you're made like. Jealous. Oh, now we become jealous because we have developed a love affair with a machine, with a chemical. And all you need to do is give your computer a male or female name, and I'll tell you what, what's happening with that machine is the same things that should be happening in marriage. What's happening with the chemical is the same thing that should be happening in the relationships. And so we become jealous and begin guarding them and fantasizing. In pornography, that certainly is a very obvious one. But people begin fantasizing. It'll get better. We become delusional. Everything's going to be all right. We know it isn't if we keep this stuff up. And then selfishness comes in as a character defect, followed by judgmentalism. And often that's in the form of judging our brethren. Well, they didn't handle that right. Well, I don't like the way they did this or that. As if that excuses us from what we've been doing. Tell you what, in addiction, the last thing an addict wants to do is take care of their side of the street. What they want to do is take care of your side of the street, and somehow it's your problem because you didn't approach me right about this. When actually, their side of the street needs to be taken care of by them and ours by us. And then there's the self-hate or the loathing of ourselves because we feel lower than pond scum when we're involved in this stuff. And ultimately what happens is with the self-hate is we begin to loathe ourselves so much that can go into depression or it goes into escape in some other ways. Resentment is also a big one because what happens now is the person begins to resent anyone who has intruded between them and their addiction. And I resent you, and sometimes if that's in the form of a husband or wife or a marriage, and someone has stepped in between and stopped this process of this affair with this machine, and they do that, then a lot of times there's resentment that plays out in a lot of other ways, including bitterness in the marriage, and often marriages end in divorce over this very thing. And then there's the despair. I don't know what to do. And that's especially true as other people begin to find out, as the message gets out. Well, did you know that brother so-and-so has been messing with himself in front of the computers? And then everybody's all embarrassed. Did you know sister so-and-so has been out there with an affair on the internet? and then everybody gets all embarrassed about it, and sometimes they feel like they can't even hardly crawl under the door. So what are we supposed to do about that? We'll talk about that in just about a half a minute. So why don't we replace this? The character defects that have slowly drifted into our life that our addiction has brought into us, here's what they've robbed us of. They've robbed us of our faith. They've robbed us of our love. They've robbed us of humility. They've robbed us of our serenity. That's our peace of mind. They've robbed us of taking any action because we kind of get stuck out here. They've robbed us of acceptance of the fact that we need to do something about the problem. They've robbed us of being able to trust each other. We've lost the ability to be honest. They've robbed us of reality. They've robbed us of the service we ought to be offering to God. And they also have robbed us of forgiveness that comes from acknowledging and confessing our sins. The one that hides his sins shall not prosper, the book of Proverbs says. But whoso confesses and forsakes them is going to find forgiveness. And so, what we've done is we've built tolerance and hope and all these other things out here. Here's what this looks like, and this is the church you have. And I want to suggest to you, when I say, when someone asks me, well, what do I need to change about myself if I have any of these addictions, whether it's internet addiction, whether it's substance addiction, whether it's gambling, whatever it is, then what do I do? What do I have to do? And when people ask me that question, I say, oh, that's easy. I can tell you what you need to do. Here's what you need to change. Everything. Here's why I say that. Because what they don't see is this is what has replaced who they are. And they don't see that at that point. And what I have to do is to show them, look at the things that you used to have in hard to bring hold. And look what sin has done to you in robbing you of all the character, in robbing you of the principles that God wants you to have. And now have in place of that given you the character defects. So what is the journey back? The journey back is not as easy as saying, oh, I'm sorry. The journey back, and here's this chart that I use, and what I ask people to do is to use this like a graph, or like a Likert chart, or 1 to 10, if you want to put numbers in there, and to go through that and talk about where you are on your journey from faith, from fear, back to faith. Where are you from that which you hate, or those persons you despise, on your way back to the law that God would have you have? And you can take that and plot out where you are in terms of changing the defects of character of the obsessions you have in your life, or the compulsions that you may have in your life, and chart yourself where you are in restoring yourself back to sanity and to relationship with God. Is that chart clear? I can talk a lot more on it, but I think you got the point. And what I want to suggest to you tonight is that we serve a God who loves us and cares about us. But what often people don't see is what their addiction has done to them. It has robbed them of access to their self. It's robbed them of their values and their strength of character. It's robbed them of relationship with God. And in place of it, what we have is all the ugliness of sin that now has become a part, an entrenched part of our character, brought in by the addiction. In conclusion, I have long believed that the addictive behaviors have been a substitute for spirituality. By that, what I mean is that as people begin making their journey back, you know what they begin talking about? God, relationship with God, forgiveness, making amends. As people begin doing that, what I begin to realize is this, that the way back from addictive behaviors is through relationship with God. And what I also realize is these things that they've been doing have been substitutes for that relationship. Jesus, my friend, is the real thing. He will give you a high like you've never had. He will give you true joy and peace that passes all understanding. He will give you satisfaction of mind. He will give you a relief from the burdens of life. He will give you a present help in times of trouble, in place of the bridge over troubled water. You don't find God at the bottom of a bottle, or the end of a pipe, or a picture on a computer screen. You find Him in relationship. And if that's who you want in your life, then you have to kick all this other stuff out, because God requires full surrender. Long ago, there was a story told of an Indian chief, and some missionaries were out trying to talk to these Indians out west about relationship with God. And the preacher got out there and he was preaching about the love of God that sent Jesus down to earth. And the story kind of moved this Indian chief, and he came walking down to the front where the preacher was. And in the front, he says, he had a little blanket, and he said, "Indian chief, give blanket to Jesus Christ." And the preacher kept on preaching. Ignored it. Chief went back where he was, and in a few more moments, the Indian chief came down again as the preacher began talking about Jesus and the horrible ordeal in the Garden of Gethsemane, where he sweated as it was drops of blood, and the chief was moved. And he brought his best pony and brought it up front, and he said, "Chief, give pony to Jesus Christ." And the preacher kept on preaching. As the preacher talked about the love of Jesus that hung on the cross, suspended between the heavens and the earth, to give atonement for sin, to give you a Savior and someone who will walk with you through every dark night, the Indian chief was moved. And this time he came, but his hands were empty. And he said, "Chief, give self to Jesus Christ." God doesn't want what you have. He wants you. I want to recommend tonight that if you want Him, that you need to come to Him in full surrender. Will you come to the cross? Will you find your Savior? Will you turn your back on the world and quit walking in two worlds? If we can help you to do that tonight, come to the front while we stand up and sing this song.